Bonjour tout le monde.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to meeting number 156 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
Format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents in order to protect the health and safety of all participants, including and especially the interpreters. A kind reminder to all those in person and online that for the safety of our interpreters, it is very important that your microphone is muted when you're not speaking. Merci à tous pour votre coopération.
Thank you, everyone, for your cooperation. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083G, the committee is continuing its study on Report 8, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, sent to the committee on December 2nd, 2004.
In person and some who are joining us remotely. From the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada. It's nice to see you and members of your team again. Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General, and Melanie Cabana, Principal. Thank you all for coming in. And from Export Development Canada, joining us remotely, Mayreed Lavery, President and Chief Executive Officer. Thank you for making yourself available today to you and to all your team members. Mr. Scott Moore, Executive Vice President, Finance and Chief Financial Officer. And Todd Witherhall, Senior Vice President, International Markets and Head of Communications and Public Affairs. We'll begin with opening remarks from our two group of witnesses. Ms. Hogan, you have the floor, please.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss my report on the Canada Emergency Business Account Program, which was tabled in the House of Commons on Monday. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I am accompanied today by the Deputy Auditor General, Andrew Hayes, and Melanie Cabana, the Principal who is responsible for the audit. The Canada Emergency Business Account Program, or CEBA, was put in place during the COVID-19 pandemic to help small businesses cover their expenses so that they could not defer.
In Canada, EDC acted quickly to provide $49.1 billion in loans to help almost 900,000 small businesses across Canada. However, the program was not managed with due regard for value for money. We found significant weaknesses in EDC's contract management. It relied on a single vendor, Accenture, to deliver the program. The non-competitive contracts awarded to Accenture represented 92% of the total value of $342 million in contracts related to the CEBA program. EDC gave too much control to Accenture over key aspects of contracts, such as the scope of work and pricing. EDC failed to exercise basic controls in contract management, such as monitoring whether amounts paid aligned with the work performed. Since ongoing program delivery uses Accenture's proprietary IT systems, EDC will have to rely on these non-competitive contracts until at least 2028. Nous avons également constaté.
We also found that neither the Department of Finance nor Global Affairs Canada provided effective oversight of value for money. There was an accountability void that resulted in basic program elements, including measuring outcomes, being delayed or not completed. Finance Canada did not challenge EDC's administrative spending or provide an overall spending limit. As of March 31st, 2024, that spending totaled $853 million.
91% of loans were issued to eligible businesses. We estimated that about $3.5 billion went to ineligible recipients. I am concerned that EDC only partially agreed with our recommendation that it should carry out additional work to identify all ineligible recipients and recover the amounts involved. Unlike other COVID-19 programs, CEBA is a loan program with repayments that will be ongoing for several years, while action on defaulted loans is just beginning. Value for money will be further compromised without better monitoring and improved plans to recover defaulted loans. Monsieur le Président, je termine ainsi.
Mr. Chair, that concludes my opening statement. We'd be very pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you. Thank you very much for your remarks.
Ms. Lavery, I assume it's probably you, so if so, you have the whole 5 minutes, or you're welcome to designate anyone on your team. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for inviting me here today.
To contribute to the committee's study of the Auditor General's report regarding the performance of the Canada Emergency Business Account Programme. I would like to begin by highlighting a few important notes. EDC worked collaboratively with the Office of the Auditor General. We accept the recommendations of the audit. We are focused on improving our controls and reporting, and we've established a clear process to collect on all loans, including amounts owing from ineligible recipients, and this process is underway. For those who may be less familiar, EDC is a Crown corporation that operates under a mandate to support and grow Canada's export trade. We help mitigate risks for thousands of Canadian exporters and investors, as well as for international buyers, through our suite of financing solutions, insurance products, knowledge products, and connection service. And as the committee may know, EDC has been consistently profitable throughout our 80-year history. Before we begin discussing the Government of Canada's Emergency Business Account, I would first like to say EDC understands the importance of taking stock of what worked well and what could have been better. Let's recall that when this program was announced, Canadians were boarding repatriation flights, our borders were closed to non-essential travel, and provinces were declaring states of emergency. Schools, offices, and businesses were forced to shutter, and Canada's unemployment rate was on its way to a record high. On March 27, the Government of Canada announced the creation of the Canada Emergency Business Account Programme, directing EDC to administer it under Canada Account. Then they expanded EDC's mandate so we could work directly with domestic businesses. Through this programme, eligible small businesses and not-for-profits were provided up to $60,000 in partially forgivable loans. For many business owners, those loans help them keep their lights on, pivot to new ways of doing business, or, in some cases, avoid bankruptcy. Acting as program administrator for the Emergency Business Account, we had to essentially build a bank within EDC, developing complex infrastructure that did not exist. We created systems capable of funding, tracking, and collecting 900,000 loans. We created processes that allowed us to share information with nearly every bank and credit union in the country. The program began accepting applications in April 9, less than 2 weeks after the government's announcement. When the federal government announced the program, EDC was already at capacity, supporting our customers and delivering other relief programs specifically for Canadian exporters. Undertaking this program required us to mobilize both internal and external resources quickly so we could pivot to supporting non-exporting small Canadian businesses and not-for-profits. These businesses employ 9.7 million people in Canada. We know they form the backbone of the economy, and we know they are often the most vulnerable in times of crisis. We understood this program was mission critical. But we would have not been able to deliver on what the government asked of us without specialised third-party support. In the end, over 21 months, we partnered with more than 230 financial institutions to deliver almost 900,000 loans, $49.1 billion in emergency support to more than 75% of all Canadian small businesses from coast to coast to coast. For context, in a typical year, EDC extends about 300 loans. While processing applications and delivering these emergency loans to businesses, we were also adapting and finding solutions to the government's decisions to expand eligibility, increase loan amounts, and extend deadlines. With each change, we worked to deliver pandemic relief as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and we succeeded at a reasonable cost of approximately $300 per loan. Still, there is always an opportunity to improve our practices, especially with a first-of-kind program launched in an unprecedented time, and this audit offers important recommendations for how we can do so. We are working to implement all of the Auditor General's recommendations. EDC has already identified some similar areas for improvement and is implementing an action plan. We anticipate a number of improvements will be in place before the end of this year. Encore une fois, merci de nous.
Again, thank you for inviting us to take part in your study.
Inviting us to contribute to your study. I look forward to the discussion and the opportunity to offer more information on EDC's role. Thank you, merci.
And we thank you as well. We'll begin our first round, which will consist of 4 members, 6 minutes each. Mr. Viss, I understand you'll be leading us off. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses today. Ms. Lavery, you just stated at the end of your testimony that you are currently looking at areas of improvement. $3.5 billion of taxpayer money was improperly distributed to ineligible businesses. Who should be fired for making such a big mistake?
This program was built in an unprecedented time of the pandemic, and the deliverable was to deliver at speed and to introduce liquidity into the economy for the benefit of small business. And over 900,000 businesses were supported at a time when they were struggling, when they were facing bankruptcy, when they were challenged, and in fact, very challenged to support not only their employees and meet their costs, but also support their families, given many of these organizations are entrepreneurs.
Thank you. The Auditor General is here today in person, I might add, and at our meeting this week, the Auditor General confirmed that the pandemic is not an excuse for proper program delivery or operationalization. So again, I'll ask, who should be fired for wasting $3.5 billion of taxpayer money? Is it you or anyone else at EDC who should be held responsible for wasting this much money?
This was a complex program that provided support to over 900,000 small businesses across Canada. It was provided in an unprecedented time, and it was a very complex program that necessitated a number of changes. The application criteria was changed 5 times. The eligibility criteria was changed 5 times. In fact, the actual loan amount was adjusted as well as was the repayment deadline.
Ms. Lavery,
this program was incredibly important.
Of the, I believe, 91 or 92% of all contracts went to a single third party. That's a censure. In other words, the majority of this complex work that was given to EDC to conduct on behalf of Canadians was given to a third party to do. The Auditor General outlined that you had multiple opportunities to undertake a competitive bidding process to ensure accountability of taxpayer money, to ensure that there was value for money, yet at numerous occasions you did not exercise that authority as a CEO to let other companies bid competitively on the work being undertaken on behalf of Canadians. Why not?
That's correct. We did go with a sole source to Accenture on this program. The reason for that was, again, to ensure that the This program was delivered at speed to provide $49 billion to small businesses across Canada. That necessitated us moving with a vendor that could provide that support in a very fast time frame and that could work with more than 233 financial institutions across Canada. We did look at RFPing it and would have desired to RFP that. The number of program changes and the asks of us did not allow that to happen.
Okay.
Since then, we have changed our processes.
Ms. Lavery, there are a lot of Canadians who are struggling right now, and the fact that you came to this committee, you've read the Auditor General report, and you cannot point out one single person, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone at Accenture, who should be held accountable for making these decisions. Now, what's even more distressing is that you are in contract with Accenture until 2028, and Accenture is effectively auditing their own work and conducting further business on behalf of Canadians. Is that appropriate? And is that even in line with the conflict of interest guidelines that EDC is subject to?
We are in line with our own guidelines with respect to procurement. And I would ask Mr. Moore, our Chief Financial Officer, to describe the contracting process at EDC.
Correct. So we have a preference for competitive procurements at EDC. In this case, as Ms. Lavery explained, the timing of the original sourcing with Accenture was such that we did not have time. And given all of the different changes in the program over almost a 2-year period, we were continuing to work under that arrangement. As we got into 2021 and we looked at the collections phase, which is a very important phase.
Mr. Moore, is it not problematic? Is it not problematic that EDC did not do a better job of ensuring value for money of taxpayer dollars by going through a competitive bidding process? Are Canadians asking too much when they want value for their money? Why can't you guys give me a straight answer?
So I think it's important to look at what Accenture delivered as part of this program. So as our vendor, they were critical to developing the technology and the process to receive applications from 233 financial institutions. They helped us deliver on an eligibility program. They helped us deliver technology to receive 2 million documents. They helped us build a loan accounting system to manage over 100,000 loans. We developed a call center that received 450,000 calls over the life of the program when we did it for $300 per loan.
Thank you. And that is the time. Moving now to Mr. Drouin, joining us virtually. Mr. Drouin, you have the floor. Pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question will be to EDC. Now, of course, we know it was a sole source contract. My question is, who initiated the conversation? Was it like an unsolicited proposal by Accenture? Did similar companies submit unsolicited proposals to offer similar services as Accenture was doing? Just so I understand the relationship between EDC and Accenture. Was Accenture already a service provider with EDC, and that's why you guys chose Accenture right away?
Accenture was an existing service provider for which EDC had run an RFP process back in 2017. They were very familiar with the processes and systems at EDC, and given the speed and efficiency with which this program was established and needed to be available to distribute the funds to the small businesses that were facing bankruptcy and inability to pay their bills, we went with someone that we felt could deliver that in a timely manner, as well as had significant financial service experience working with Canadian financial institutions. And this program ultimately resulted in agreements with 233 financial institutions right across Canada, and that experience was invaluable.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be the MP that's going to give you heat because you chose the sole source. I've had extensive 10 years experience in the private sector working with IT firms, and the saying in Ottawa was always there's no such thing as a 3-month government sale. And I know that you guys were in a hurry And we were all getting pressure back home to once the announcement was made to get this undergoing. But where I do have some issues, and I think the Auditor General is right, billing practices. Is there any plans for EDC to recoup some of those costs that were, for instance, we're looking at call centers that were billing for, hours that were over the actual opening of those said call centers. So is EDC now, they know that the Auditor General has done a report? Are you guys looking at this? And there's, regardless of what the contract said, I'm assuming that EDC would want to recoup some of those costs if Accenture, for whatever reason, overbilled. Is there any plans to recoup some of those costs within EDC? Or?
I will pass to Mr. Moore to explain the contracting process as well as the controls we have to ensure that we only paid for services received.
Thank you. So the Auditor General did identify opportunities for us to improve our controls in and around billing and contracting, and we have agreed to implement those recommendations. I did want to focus on the controls that EDC did have in place. And so again, we'll go back to the time we were at during the pandemic. We were very focused on outcomes as opposed to the individual activities. So how do we make sure we get $49 billion into the hands of 900,000 small businesses in Canada as soon as possible? In terms of what we were doing, we were focused on making sure those outcomes were being delivered by our vendor. That was through the form of daily huddles. It was meetings that were happening every single day and ensuring they were actually delivering what we needed. At the disbursement phase, it was to get money out the door and do eligibility. And then later in the program, it was building the collections ecosystem. We did review the invoices that were received. We certainly have an opportunity around documentation and around the more detailed tracking. We have made improvements in that area over time. So in 2023, we added all of the timesheets into our accounts payable system that all of our approvers, myself included, have access to. We've more recently added attestations around the work performed. We've more recently added all of the metrics in and around the call center. And specifically to your question on the call center, it wasn't actually an overbilling issue. It was a documentation or tracking issue. A number of those resources were working on collections processes and not on the call center. So it wasn't a question of actually billing for more hours than they worked. It was the type of work that they were doing while they were ensuring that we had coverage for a call center that needed to be available to handle questions that we continue to receive, and we do continue to receive from loan holders.
Okay, I'm sure you've all of you have read the Auditor General's report. I'm going to focus on recommendation 8.24. EDC, along with finance, should consider appropriate actions, including legal implication and options to recoup loan forgiveness from ineligible small business. Again, EDC said partially agreed to the recommendation. Finance said we fully agree. What's the rationale for EDC's response in terms of partially agreed? Do you not see that from a legal perspective, if you have to recoup some of, if they default, are you not in a legal position to do so? Or is it because you just don't believe that you have a strong legal case given the fact that you had deemed those eligible small business, even though they were ineligible based on the criteria, but you have accepted it at the time?
Yes, just to be clear, we are working to collect all loans in this category of ineligible. That is actually underway at the minute. And we agree with the Auditor General on working with Finance Canada to consider next steps. That is a very important point. This is a program that we were directed to perform from Finance Canada, and as such, we will need policy direction as to how they want to deal with the loan forgiveness, and that is what related to our appointment. Our comment on partially agree was really waiting on direction from Department of Finance.
Et merci beaucoup. Suivant, c'est Madame.
Thank you, Madame Sinclair Desgagnés. 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to the Auditor General's office for appearing in person. The first question I have is this. It's a question that I would like to have a clear response to, according to the documents that we have. It's a question for EDC in paragraph 29 of the report. we see that you use an excuse. You had indicated to the AG's officer that you didn't have the expertise or the infrastructure to deliver the program. Did you mention this element, which is quite important, to finance or to GAC?
At the time the program was being considered in March 2020, we indicated that we typically give 300 loans per year. And while we didn't know the extent of the program, that it would reach 900,000 loans at that time, it was certainly of a magnitude that was very different to what EDC does in its day-to-day business. So we indicated that that would be very challenging and that we would need to use third-party support to deliver.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you. But how did you do so? By email, orally, verbally? How did you express this very important idea that you didn't have the expertise or the capacity to manage such a program? And if you could provide the emails, can you do that, please?
So to answer the question, I need to go back to March 2020 when all of us were dealing with the pandemic and had just moved all of our staff to remote work. Everyone was dealing with matters in a very quick way. So this was a process whereby there was daily calls between not only Department of Finance and EDC, but with financial institutions to try and develop this program. So Department of Finance was working on policy as well as participating in weekly and daily calls as to how this program could be constructed. So many of the discussions were verbal as it was on a timely basis to try and set up this program.
Je comprends bien.
I understand, but I would like to think that for such a significant program, an important program that would be helping some 900,000 Canadian businesses, that you would have the capacity to be able to provide for that possibility. I know it's not the mandate necessarily of EDC, but there is the principle of covering yourself, of being able to recover. So that said, if you could give us any document as to what you recall from this first step, it would be appreciated. Now, concerning the various control processes, in February of this year, you appeared before committee and you said that what had occurred with Accenture, the news came out in the English newspapers that you were using a sole source contract, this single business for all this work, without any type of competitive process. 31 contracts with a total value of $208 million. Ms. Lavery, 19 contracts for some $300 million. So how did you get to the ultimate figure?
Thank you. I will pass the question to Mr. Moore.
Yep. So at the time, the $208 million reference was actually now $209 million. So it's the actual spend as opposed to the contract value. So apologies if that was confusing at the time of the February committee. So the actual spend, as you see here, is indeed $209 million with Accenture. The number of contracts at the time was probably just a mistake. So apologies for that. You have the actual numbers here. In terms of the overall contract value, it is indeed 313, and the spend is indeed 209 million.
Merci beaucoup. Passons.
Thank you very much. Speaking about your call center, Mr. Moore, you brought up stats with respect to this. The call center got contracts totaling $27 million. There were over 400,000 calls that were made to that center, if I recall correctly. We, members of Parliament and the Canadian Independent Businessmen's Association, mentioned that they had difficulty contacting anybody, speaking to someone about this issue. You said that you received a significant volume of calls, and the businesses in question did not get any replies. But they tell us that they had tried to contact you over and over again, that is to say, your call centers, but they were unable to get in touch with the call center. But your version said otherwise. So what is the reality here? Can you give us the verification of the number of calls and calls answered from these centers?
Perhaps I will take that question just to describe the call center process and how that actually worked. So when we first established the call center, it was in response to an increasing number of calls from potential loan holders, in fact, all the applicants to the process. The number of calls far exceeded what we anticipated at that stage, and that necessitated us continuing to add resources to the call center to be able to respond to it. We were monitoring a statistic which was lax. We actually had to stop taking calls directly because, to your point, people were not able to get through directly on the line. So we moved to a callback model, and we were monitoring the number of calls in that queue. So people did receive a call. It was not when they called in because they were called back. Their call was returned. But at the peak of the activity in the call center, that callback queue reached over 22,000 businesses who were in the queue for a call back. So it was a very significant effort and at a very stressful time for these businesses. We had instances where businesses were calling in and suggesting their only path forward was in fact a suicide option. We had businesses who were certainly looking at bankruptcy, who were really struggling. So we put more resources to continue trying to address the needs of those businesses and worked very closely with organizations like CFIB who were hearing that from their members.
Est-ce qu'il y avait une deuxième question?
Did you have a second question? No. No? All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to the next.
Mr. Canning, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you for all the witnesses for being here again today, and thank you, Ms. Hogan, for I know we've been questioning you now. We questioned you twice on Monday, and now you're here again, so thank you for that. And I'm going to ask you a question off the top that I know I asked on Monday, but just for the purposes of this study, I'd like to get it on the record, and that is, you know, one of your mandates is to make sure we're getting value for money when we use taxpayers' money in Canada. And here we have a program where it seemed it worked very well in getting the money out the door, you know, helping these businesses. And I think most of your criticism has come from how that money we're trying to recover that money. And then there's some issues around contracts, which I'll get to. But one thing I was hearing from businesses, you know, we just heard from Ms. Lavery about, you know, the panic and the desperation in a lot of these businesses, is that they needed more time to repay these loans. Initially, I think the deadline was the end of 2022. There was an extension made to 2023, but even then, I was getting a lot of concern. And did you look at anything that would model the benefits to Canada, to the government, of adding another year's extension to make sure that we didn't bankrupt thousands of businesses and we'd be able to recover that money? Did you look at that at all, or were you just looking at the mechanics, the audit of the books as we see?
So I agree with your summary that what was done well. It was very quick to get billions of dollars of loans to almost 900,000 businesses. It's the how it was done where better efficiency could have been achieved to have better value for money. Your question linked to did we look at if extensions would have made a difference? No, we didn't. So it's a policy question as to when it's going, when the loans were going to have to be repaid. We did try to figure out, though, as we did in some of the other COVID relief programs, if this was tied to anything to show that it matched health restrictions or so on. But this program was of such a broad general nature. It wasn't linked to health measures. It wasn't to focus in on an industry. It was a really broad application to help support small businesses. However, small businesses also had the ability to access rent relief and wage subsidies in addition to the Canada Emergency Business Account. So it was impossible for us to separate whether one program would have made a difference or not. It was probably a combination of it. And I guess I would say that it's likely that businesses that needed it the most are probably the businesses that had to refinance in the end. So, it is possible as well that many businesses that applied for the loans didn't need it and were able to quickly repay it in order to take advantage of the forgiveness. However, how to measure whether they needed it or not, it is a very difficult thing when you think about what was going on in 2020. So it was too difficult for us. The government hadn't done it, and it was difficult for us to separate how the CEBA program made or break the success of a small business coming through the pandemic.
How much time do I have, Chair?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, I'm going to turn to Ms. Lavery. You talked about how the government came to you. You said to finance that this wasn't your normal way of operating. You worked with big loans to a few people. Was there any time that you said to them, why don't you just go to Accenture? That's what we would do, and take out that middleman, and we would have much greater oversight here today if the government had actually done that rather than go through EDC, which is a Crown corporation and has a different relationship to Parliament here at least. Was there any time you just said, why are you involving us? We don't have the capacity. We're going to have to get Accenture to do it all.
Yeah, so there's two elements to this program. One is actually the disbursements to the financial institutions who actually distributed the loans to the 900,000 businesses, as well then as all the administration associated with dispersing the loans to the banks onward to the companies, as well as then processing the applications and building systems of record to ensure we would be able to collect those loans. Department of Finance deemed that the vehicle they were going to use to do the distribution to the financial institutions was through Canada Account, and EDC is the administrator of Canada Account, which in the past has been single transactions that usually fall within areas that EDC has the skills, resources to deliver upon. So that's, I believe, why the Department of Finance chose EDC, which then needed to be supported with the administration thereafter.
Thank you very much. That is the time. You got a few seconds left, Mr. Canning, but I'll add them to another slot, which are a little slower, a little shorter for you. Beginning our second round, which will consist of 6 members of various times. Mr. McCauley, you're leading us off for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. To our witnesses with EDC, first of all, let me express my disappointment with all of you on such an important meeting that not one of you could bother to show up in person. Ms. Lavery, who did you push back to at Finance to state that you did not have the capacity at EDC to administer this program?
I would like Mr. Winterhall to describe the government processes.
I'm not asking for that. Who did you push back against at Finance that you did not have the capacity to administer the program?
This was a program that was built in a manner that involved a number of departments as well as external.
You expressed to
external
finance that
people.
you did not have the capacity to administer the program, correct?
We discussed the operational risks that would be associated with EDC and what we would need to do to deliver this program.
And who was that
including
with?
the
With
use of
finance,
third-party
please.
resources.
I've asked
That
4
was
times
with
now,
the
who at
finance
finance,
officials.
please? Okay, I didn't
That was
ask
with
what
the-
officials, department, who exactly at finance, please? The deputy minister, the ADM, the minister? Who, please?
This was with finance officials below the deputy minister level. There were numerous officials from Department of Finance at that point.
Provide those to us. Your memory obviously is shaky at this moment, but provide it to us in writing, please. Did you advise?
Just one second. I've taught, so if you could provide those names, then, I mean, Mr. McCauley's asked for that information 4 times, and so the committee will look for that. If you could provide that to us next couple of weeks, please.
I'd
Mr.
be
McCauley,
happy to do
you
so.
have the floor, 3.5 minutes.
Thanks. You mentioned earlier that you advised finance that you did not have the capacity and you would have to seek outside resources, which ended up being Accenture. Did you advise finance you'd be using Accenture specifically, or just that you would be contracting it out?
We advised that we would be contracting it out and that it would be a single source, not RFP.
So you knew
process.
already you were going to sole source it to Accenture?
We knew already that we needed to move very fast to put these
Please,
funds in the hands of small
Ma'am,
business.
just if I ask a simple yes or no question, would you provide a simple yes or no answer? I think Canadians and parliamentarians deserve that. Did you advise or did you already know that Accenture would be the recipient of the sole source contract? It's a yes or no answer.
Yes.
Thank you. That's not that tough, is it? Mr. Winterhold, in your response to some of the mess of the sole sourcing with Accenture, the comment was you're updating your procurement policies in light of the audit. I have to ask you, like, you sole sourced to Accenture and allowed a shark of a consulting company to sole source a contract to themselves, dictating to Canadians how much taxpayers are going to pay and for what services. Like, how do you need an audit like this to set up procurement practices that doesn't turn over taxpayers' bank to a company like Accenture? Like, how is it not part of your proper? How is it not part of your regular daily procurement process that you have to have an audit to tell you, don't give a wad of cash sole source to a company and let them sole source other work to themselves, dictating to taxpayers how much they were going to charge us?
I'll ask Mr. Moore to speak to our procurement practices and provide some insight.
Well, it doesn't sound like you actually have a procurement practice.
So we do. We have a strong preference to doing RFPs.
Okay,
The
let me
only
stop
exception
you
at
right
EDC
there. You don't have a practice or a rule to get competitive bids. You just have a preference. Were you aware that Accenture was going to sole source and choose themselves for that contract, for the added work?
So the contract that you're referring to for the loan accounting system was a very complicated implementation. When we went ahead with
No
the
question.
loan
I would
accounting
ask you to
system,
respect
there was-
that. I asked you a question. Were you aware that that secondary contract that noted by the Auditor General that Accenture was going to grant that contract to themselves?
So EDC granted the contract. Accenture ran a market scan and identified 24
Were you aware that
companies.
Accenture identified themselves as the person to give the money to?
Accenture identified 24 options. There was one Canadian option, one European option, one Brazil option. We were quite disappointed when the Canadian option actually pulled themselves out of the process.
Okay, were you aware that
We had a
Accenture
European
was sole
option, we
sourcing
had
a
Brazil.
contract to themselves?
We were aware that one of the options had recently been acquired by Accenture. Yes.
Did
we
you not?
our
Did it not set off
analysis.
alarm bells? Like, honestly, I'm trying to grasp in what world that you would not be setting your hair on fire over Accenture taking taxpayers' money and saying, you know, we're going to hire ourselves for this other work, but don't worry, we'll let you know what the fair price we're going to charge ourselves to charge the taxpayers. Like, how could this have happened?
So
Easy.
Go ahead, Mr. Moore.
EDC made the final decision to go
Kelly, you're
with
done.
the option that was presented to us. It was the lower cost and lower execution risk from among the choices that were available to us to get a loan accounting system built and ready in 6 months was the timing we had at that time.
Thank you very much. Up next, Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses today. Some questions here for the Auditor General. Thank you for your work on this report. The recommendations you bring forward are quite useful, but I'd like to focus on the context in which the CEPA program was developed. You note that the government was able to quickly deliver loans to small businesses, but I read few mentions of the fact that the program was developed during the pandemic. Could you expand on how difficult it would have been to be developed and to launch a program of this scale less than 2 weeks after the country was locked down?
So we do include several mentions in our audit report that it is during the context of the pandemic, and like other COVID programs that were launched, this was done in really record speed to put up a program of such magnitude, and really is very quick when you think that 900,000 businesses, for the most part, in less than 28 days, had the funds that they needed to receive. As I mentioned earlier, it wasn't the what was done. That was well done. It was the how that it was done. And while I do recognize that at the start of the pandemic, it made sense to find a vendor because EDC needed surge capacity to do this, it made sense to go with a vendor you knew. But that doesn't mean that you continue to rely on that vendor and don't move away from hourly contracts to perhaps fixed price. We only saw the movement to fixed price in 2024. 3 years down the line, you should have had time to also run some competitive processes. But I do recognize, and we acknowledge that even in the report, that throughout all of this, there were delays in receiving decisions on the policy front because this program was transitioning a lot. But it still is the responsibility of EDC as the Crown delivering on the program to try and always achieve best value for money. And that could be challenging. Is that really the right price? Could we get a better price? Could we fix it into a fixed price versus hourly? Certain things I think that could have been done to improve the value for money as this went along.
Do you believe it would have been possible to have a competitive contract take place to meet the need required by the businesses in 2020 during the COVID pandemic?
So that's a difficult question to answer because there was so much going on in 2020, and I think everyone forgets the level of uncertainty, and no one really knew how long this pandemic was going to last. But we did show in other COVID reports how after the first initial contract, there are opportunities to do quick competitive contracts, sometimes at 10 days, sometimes with a small group of vendors. You just have to find the time and the ability to do that. But I acknowledge that at the beginning, a directed contract to someone you knew made sense. It's what you do after a bit of time is where you could have shown better value for money.
I believe the program would have been better value for cost if it was administered within the public service, and would that account for added costs like benefits, pensions, equipment, and other accrued costs?
I mean, there's so many costs when you try to look at a fully loaded cost of a full-time equivalent employee versus a vendor. So it's a really difficult comparison to give. I think that in 2020, the public service was doing so much for Canadians. They were delivering CERB. They were trying to set up queues. There was a lot going on. So I said, again, I believe that this was a good choice to find a vendor to help support. It was the continued reliance and the poor contract management controls that I question the value for money that the government really received.
So how large a staff would be needed to administrate the scale of a massive program like CEPA? Any guess? I mean,
I don't know. That's a really tough question for me to say. I don't know how many people throughout Accenture and all the other vendors that might have supported, and the financial institutions. Let's remember, 233 financial institutions actually got the money out into the hands of small businesses. So that's a lot of people. It would be really hard for me to, while I love numbers, add those up and tell you what the right number might be.
So I still today hear from a lot of business owners in my writing about how critical the support was for them and their employees. It seems that Stats Canada did a report on business support programs during the pandemic and noted that over 43% of businesses relied solely on CEBA for support during the pandemic. Given Canada has had one of the strongest economic recoveries since the pandemic, could you speak to us a bit about this limited analysis of the economic benefits of the program?
So as I mentioned earlier, it's hard to tie this program to a specific measure as to why it was happening. There were other programs that were really targeting certain industries. There were programs that matched health restrictions, so the closures of businesses. This was just a general program. There was, for the most part, only a salary threshold that you had to fall into. So really hard to know whether this temporary program versus the others being permanent would have made a difference when every business who signed on here knew that they were going to have to repay something. So you knew going into this that somewhere down the line there was a debt that you would owe back to the government.
Thank you. That is your time. Next suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair de Gagné.
Ms. Sinclair de Gagné, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. To the Auditor General, I have a series of questions. And can you please give me quick answers to them? First of all, the process described by Mr. Moore, that is, that a third party, Accenture, did a market study to determine what and who would be the best possible choice for the issuance of the program. Do you find that to be usual in your experience dealing with government programs? I think that I said it before. A public servant and the government of Canada has to really be at a higher level of service, particularly with respect to a program like that. Yeah, I thank you for your answer. I know that certain public servants should have listened to your very wise advice. A part of the money, a part of the taxpayers' money was spent elsewhere in Canada. Then in Canada, do you know how much, say, for example, was spent in Brazil, was dispersed to Brazil? No, I'm going over the contracts now in detail to establish what was the rationale behind the loans. It was a contract. How much was that contract worth? $36 million and $7 million for. So it is then the agreement for the issuance of the contract that was in Brazil. Yes, it was issued to Accenture. People were working on it, but they weren't all here in Canada. All right, thank you. And it was mentioned that EDC was very proud of the fact that that money should remain in Canada. So it seems to me that there was a contradiction there. Mr. Moore, now that you've heard the Auditor General say what she just said, doesn't this complicate matters? You were part of the government, and you've heard the Auditor General mention the fact that the standard should be held it should have been higher, that public servants should be held to a higher standard. Can you assume any responsibility for bringing matters back to an equivalent? Because this is very important for Canadians and Quebecers.
General's recommendation in this area, so it's not something that we do and not something that we will do going forward. So we agree it's not the way that we would do contracting in this example. I'd also like to go back to your comment or question around Brazil. So just to put actual numbers, I like numbers also. I'm a CFO. So the Brazil contract, $17 million, so less than 10% of the total spend with Accenture is actually Brazil oriented. If you look at the contract that you're referencing, there were 180 individuals from Accenture involved in implementing the loan accounting system, of which 50 were Brazil located. The rest were principally Canadian. and today as the loan accounting system is now live, and it went live in time for us to receive information from the financial institutions. We're down to 10 individuals that are working on the program from Brazil for change requests and maintenance.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup. Suivant,
Thank you. Up next.
for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, and I'll just turn to Ms. Hogan again. We've been hearing about the contracts, especially the initial contract to Accenture that EDC carried out, and it seems that, I mean, what you said that EDC gave too much control to the vendor over key aspects of the contract, such as scope of work and pricing, failed to exercise basic controls in contract management. I mean, I used to be a consultant and get government contracts. I don't remember ever writing my own contracts. I was always given a contract to sign. How often does this happen in your experience of looking at government work, that there is basically, you say, here's a problem, can you write a contract for yourself, and we'll sign it?
It's not a typical practice that I usually see when we do work on procurement. However, we have seen it in other pandemic situations, and ArriveCan would be an example that I could bring up.
So, okay, I'll just turn then to Ms. Lavery or whoever feels they are best able to answer that. Why was this contract handled in this way? I know you didn't have the capacity to do the whole project, but I would assume that EDC at least has the capacity to write even fairly complicated contracts.
Mr. Muir can talk to you about our contracting, and you are correct. We have that ability, and in fact ensured that we did provide the terms and conditions. It was the joint work on the scope of what was actually needed to be included that was worked with Accenture. Mr. Muir, would you like to add something?
I would just add that that's indeed correct, so that the actual final pricing was EDC's pricing. The terms were EDC's terms. The contract was ours. Certainly, we did work together with the vendor on the implementation planning, given the scale of the program and the speed at which we were trying to get it done.
So you didn't think that, say, allowing an hourly basis for the contract was maybe a bit or a lot risky versus some set price?
So we have a strong preference for deliverable-based contracts, and that is true in overall. In this case, the number of changes to the program are an important reminder for all of us. I mean, during the beginning of the program, the application deadline was changed 5 times. The criteria was changed multiple times. The program was expanded multiple times. And so the scope was not clear as we worked our way through really the first 2 years of the program. Fixed deliverables are appropriate in most cases, but when the scope is clear, the scope of the work was not clear for a very long period of time, which is why we went with the time and materials-based contract, which again is not our preference. Certainly as we worked our way later into the program for the collections phase, unfortunately, there were a number of changes around collections in terms of what would be required, what the repayment dates would be, and that also made it very hard to get to a scope that enabled a deliverables-based contract. The Auditor General has identified that indeed when we got to 2024 and the scope is now much clearer, we have moved to a deliverable-based contract. I would also note that we've issued an RFP for some of the services. The call center and customer service notably has gone out to RFP. So we are moving in the direction of the recommendations of the Auditor General, which again, we acknowledge.
Thank you very much. Turning on to Mr. Nader for 5 minutes, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you to the Office of the Auditor General and their Auditor General for joining us in person, and to the representatives from EDC for joining us virtually. Mr. Moore, could you inform this committee where the EDC headquarters is located?
EDC headquarters is located in Ottawa.
About 450 meters from Parliament Hill, in fact. So it is somewhat disappointing, sir, that considering you personally seem to charge thousands of dollars to show up to your job in Ottawa, you wouldn't take the courtesy of coming to speak with us in person, considering this is such an important matter. And of course, Ms. Lavery, you seem to have no problems charging $18,000 to go to Japan for a couple days, $16,000 to go to South Korea, $19,000 to travel to Australia, but the courtesy of showing up in person to account for this major and damning report is unfortunate. Ms. Lavery, Section 8.52 of the report says that EDC identified and referred 17 cases of fraud to law enforcement. What was the dollar value of those cases?
The dollar value of that was just close to $1 million.
$1 million. And when were those cases referred to law enforcement?
I don't have that information in front of me. I can provide that to the clerk.
Yes, we would like that referred to back to the clerk within an appropriate time. What follow-up has happened since then? Have there been any criminal charges laid on those matters?
The RCMP doesn't provide us with details of their follow-up actions, so I'm not aware of what actions may have been taken.
What encounters have you personally had with the RCMP since those matters were referred?
I've had no encounters with the RCMP.
And are you aware of whether the RCMP has requested any information from EDC since the original referral of those informations?
RCMP works with EDC by producing production orders on EDC with respect to certain files. We have received production orders and the information that has been requested has been provided.
Of the ineligible loans, in the tune of $3.5 billion, obviously we know that those loans were partially forgivable. Are you able to provide this committee with how much of that forgivable portion was indeed received by these ineligible recipients, and what efforts EDC has made to collect that forgivable portion from ineligible recipients?
So EDC is in the process of collecting from the ineligible population. We are working very hard on that. We estimate that over $2 billion has been repaid from the ineligible population. We also agree with the Auditor General's recommendation on working with Finance Canada to consider the next steps with respect to the forgiveness that you describe in your question.
So you're not able to provide us with that amount that was the forgivable portion of that amount?
No, I'm not, with respect to the repayment.
Can you follow up with the committee for that information?
Yes, we're working with Finance Canada to determine the actions with respect to that population.
In the AG report, it states, and I'm going to quote from page 23, from April to November 2023, our analysis identified some discrepancies in the hours charged on invoices. Primarily, the EDC seems to have paid an average of 14 hours per agent per day when the call center was only open for 9 hours. EDC did not identify these discrepancies at the time of the payment. So what was the additional cost of those hours that were paid for time that the call center wasn't actually open?
Yes, I'll ask Mr. Moore to describe the documentation challenges we had with that.
Yeah, so I answered this question earlier, but it is a question of documentation as opposed to a billing issue. So the individuals in question were covering the call center. We were continuing to receive calls, and they were working on setting up the collections processes for the future that we are now.
Sounds like GC Strategies was advising those on document orders. Chair, with the minute or so I have left, I'd like to move a motion. Given the Auditor General's Report 8/2024 on the Canada Emergency Business Account, CEBA, which revealed significant issues regarding the oversight and administration of public funds and concerns related to governance, procurement, and risk management pursuant to Standing Order 1083G, the committee commenced a study on this audit and invite the following witnesses in relation to the study: the Ministers of National Revenue, Finance, and International Trade; Bob Hamilton, Commissioner of the Canada Revenue Agency; Chris Forbes, Deputy Minister of Finance; representatives from Accenture, the firm involved in CEBA administration; Vivian Abdulsmisia, Chair of the Export Development Canada EDC Board; Mary Lavery, Chair and CEO of the EDC Executive Team; and Miguel Simards, EDC Senior Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, Special Risks, and CEBA. And I will be moving that motion, and I believe it will be or has been sent to the clerk in both official languages. I reserve the right to make a few brief
I'll come back
comments.
to you, Mr. New. Just one second. I'm just going to suspend and come right back to you. I'm just going to make sure it's all distributed so everyone has it. Then I'm going to come back with the speaking list. I'll come back right to Mr. Nader. So just give me just a few minutes. Thank you. This meeting is suspended. Meeting back into session. The motion as advanced by Mr. Nader, which we will consider, has been sent to all members. I'm just going to ask all the witnesses just to hang tight for a little bit. I'm going to take the temperature and see if this is going to be done slowly, quickly, or with difficulty. You never know. So if you could just bear with me, and I'll come back to you very, very soon. You are, in the meantime, if you want to get up, stretch your legs, that's no problem. Just if you could kind of be in the area, and I will try to come back to you in the next 10, 15 minutes. And the same for our team of auditors here as well. If you do want to get up and stretch your leg over the next 10, 15 minutes, that's no problem as well. Mr. Nader, I'll go back to you for remarks on this motion. We'll have a debate and see where it goes.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't plan on making very lengthy remarks. I mean, I think the motion is fairly self-explanatory, requesting 7 witnesses, all pertinent to this matter, appear. Frankly, the answers that we've got so far from the officials from EDC are quite frankly unacceptable and fail to account for the seriousness of the concerns that were raised in this report. So I do think it is incumbent upon us to hear from certain witnesses and to undertake this study. So I really have nothing further to add. I think the motion is self-explanatory. It's 7 witnesses, all pertinent to the study at hand. So I'm going to leave it there, Chair, and I thank you for your time.
Mr. Cannings, I'm going to go to Mr. McCauley first, and I'll come to you right after. Mr. McCauley, you have the floor. And Mr. Drouin, I see you as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I, shockingly to everyone, support this motion. It's very clear we have a very large problem before us. We have 3 executives from EDC who, even though they're just blocks away, couldn't even be bothered to show up to defend themselves in person, but have been very obvious in their attempts not to answer questions. For a simple yes or no question, I asked, I think, 5 times for them to finally be pressured to actually respond. It's clear that I believe they are hiding some things. It's very clear we've got a lot of issues. We've heard directly from EDC that they were aware of Accenture taking advantage of taxpayers and yet sat idly by and did nothing. We've seen the government state to the Auditor General that she didn't properly acknowledge how tough times were. So we have $3 billion of taxpayers' money disappear into the ether of ineligible grants, and yet somehow the government says we don't properly acknowledge that COVID was happening. But we've heard from the Auditor General repeatedly that COVID is not an excuse for ignoring the rules. We have many people to hear from. We've heard from repeatedly today that, EDC is going to work with finance, but we have the Department of Finance stating that Finance Canada has no legislative requirements to provide oversight of administrative expenditures on behalf of CIBA. Administration of CIBA was delegated to EDC. The Board of Directors are responsible for providing oversight. So this motion calls to have the board show up. We also actually have within EDC a very large executive committee, and I'll find the exact name for you here. But they actually have a senior vice president and chief legal officer of CIBA, responsible for CIBA, and yet could not be showing or could not bother to provide that person for us name today, Miguel Samard. So the motion also includes that the senior vice president of EDC, responsible apparently for CIBA, at least that's on their website, is on the motion as well. We need to hear from finance why the finance department forced this program onto EDC when EDC was very clear they did not have the capacity. We need to hear from finance why they're saying they bear no responsibility because it's the board of directors is responsible. We need to hear more from EDC why they do not push back. If they're only doing 300 loans a year, an average one a day, then all of a sudden being told to do about 25,000 a day, obviously there is an issue there. We need to delve into that more, why EDC did not push back more, but why finance apparently thought it was a good idea to have a EDC, which only does, again, minimal amount of loans, administer 90,000 loans and $90 billion of Canadian taxpayers' money, when clearly they've said that they do not have the capacity to do so. I also think we need to hear a lot more from the Auditor General on the differences between what EDC is saying and what the Auditor General report is saying, but also between what the Auditor General is saying and what the government itself is saying. Sorry, I'm losing my voice, suffering from the cold, so I will let it go, and I'll finish up there and reserve the right to speak a bit more once my voice recovers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Cannings, you have the floor, please.
Yeah, I think we all agreed, and we agreed at the subcommittee that, this is something that we should be studying. But as the subcommittee report says here, we were supposed to be looking at other things, trying to wrap things up in December, the ArriveCAN, SDTC, before we go rushing off to the next shiny thing. So I'm hoping that we will do that. And so I guess I'd like to see in this motion some more of that structure reflected in terms of the timing, that we wouldn't have the next meeting on CIBA until the end of January, for instance, when we've finished all this other stuff, and that maybe we should add in, our agreement to look at seniors, et cetera, and how that would work. So I'm just a bit concerned if we just vote for this as it stands, that we'd be off on yet another tangent and leave all this other stuff hanging. And I'd rather, as I keep saying, I'm new to this committee and it works in wonderful and mysterious ways. But I would just rather have something in this motion that speaks to not just that we should do a study on CIBA, but that this is how it's going to fit in with the rest of our work. That's all.
Mr. Durian, you're next. If you permit me, I'll just speak to that. Is that okay, Mr. Durian? Okay. Mr. Cannings, yes, there is the report from the subcommittee, which I would still like to see passed during this meeting to reflect kind of those priorities. So one doesn't necessarily take away the other, because I too would like to fulfill what we agreed to at the subcommittee. So I'll just put that out on the table for everyone to be aware of, that I don't necessarily see this as pushing the recommendation from the subcommittee aside. Mr. Durian, you have the floor, please.
Wei, Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't necessarily disagree with the motion at hand, although there are some faulty names in there. And I was thinking that Mr. Nader would have known that, given his background in agriculture, but he would know that Mr. Forbes was the Deputy Minister of Agriculture at the time, and I'm ashamed and that he didn't pick this up in the motion that he presented. But I understand I understand we all
point of order, Chair.
A job to do.
Just 1 second, Mr. Drain.
It's the current Deputy Minister of Finance.
Okay, yeah, all right, fair enough.
It doesn't matter who it was at the time. It's the person responsible at the time.
Yes, Mr. I suspect that was the case. Mr. Drain, you have the floor.
Well, it's very hard to get answers as to what happened somewhere when somebody wasn't there. And that's the point. If we are to move and have a serious study about this particular issue, well, let's get the people who were there as opposed to not there, because they'll say, I don't know, I wasn't there at the time. And that's my point. I don't mind having witnesses to come before our committee, but let's make sure they will be able to answer the particular questions that are relevant to this particular study. And that's just what I'm trying to do. And I'm surprised that we are moving this fast after we've had a subcommittee meeting. But hey, I'm at the will of the committee. What I would do is I would move to adjourn debate.
I have a motion to adjourn debate on this motion. And I'll ask the clerk to call the roll call, please. You are, but your colleague might have ended the debate.
Ms. Bradford.
Yes. Yes.
Monsieur Drouin.
En faveur.
Mr. Erskine-Smith. Ms. Khalid. Yes. Ms. Yip. Yes. Mr. McCauley.
No.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Mr. Morantz.
No.
Madame Sinclair de Gagné.
Oui.
Mr. Cannings.
Yes, I think we should sort out this other stuff first.
7 yeas, 3 nays.
Very good. We go now back to the witness, the member list, just finishing up our second round. So witnesses, if I think everyone is ready to go here, they are. Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the witnesses for your patience while we dealt with some, let's say, housekeeping. And this is directed to Ms. Lavery. I see in the statement that you issued yesterday that 9% of loans went to ineligible recipients. Can you give us a bit of a timeline of how and when these recipients were deemed ineligible?
Thank you. I will ask Mr. Moore to walk us through the ineligible population.
Yep, thank you. So 2 distinct populations, and I'd like to make sure that both are very clear to the committee. So the first population of 2 billion are those that were identified by EDC as part of our post-funding validations on the payroll stream. So the payroll stream, again, was for small businesses that had a payroll within the eligible range. At the beginning of the program, the fundings were based on attestations from loan holders, similar to other COVID programs. EDC had a post-funding validation process to go through and make sure we identified a population of potential ineligibles. The Auditor General looked at that portion of our validation process and confirmed that it was accurate. In terms of what we identified was a population of potential ineligibles. We gave all of the loan holders an opportunity to correct any anomalies, as we should. The ending population was 51,000 or 2 billion. Of that, 900 million has repaid as of today, and 1.1 billion is subject to active collections. It's important to understand this population was not eligible for forgiveness. They were notified at the end of 2022 and then received a courtesy reminder at the end of 2023. And again, we continue to collect on the remaining amount from this population. The second population of 1.5 billion is potentially ineligible. It was based on the work of the Auditor General around the non-deferrable expense stream. So this is the stream that was for expenses such as rent, insurance, utilities, etc. Important to note that EDC's validation process prevented 5.5 billion of ineligible dollars going out the door. Based on the work of the Auditor General, we identified $10 million or 200 loan holders that were potentially ineligible. That was then extrapolated to the full population for a potential of 1.5 billion of ineligibles. That is where the work that would need to happen with finance to analyze this population. It's 135,000 loan holders. It's about 1 million documents that were submitted. Some of the documents could have technical issues. For example, a lease without a signature page. We would want to give loan holders an opportunity to correct those anomalies, similar to what was done on the payroll stream, before concluding on a final population of ineligibles in this category. And so those are the two very distinct populations.
Thank you. I'd like to now split my time with Ms. Khalid.
Thanks very much, Ms. Yip, and thank you, Chair. Chair, I really take note of the concerns of opposition, especially with the motion that they moved with respect to what programming in this committee looks like. So I think with respect to what we're discussing today and what we have been discussing over the past number of weeks and months and perhaps years, I would like to move the following motion: that notwithstanding any previous decision of the committee in relation to the committee's future business, it be agreed that 1, any further meetings on Report 8, Canada Emergency Business Account, take place after January 27, 2025, which is when we come back to the House. 2, 1 meeting be dedicated to the study of Report 1, ArriveCan. 3, at the conclusion of the meeting on Report 1, ArriveCan, no more meetings be conducted to hear from witnesses in relation to Report 1, ArriveCan. 4, 2 meetings be dedicated to the study of Report 6, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, for the purposes of hearing from Zoe Colbeck, Andrew Noseworthy, and the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. 5, at the conclusion of the second meeting on Report 6, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, no more meetings be conducted to hear from witnesses in relation to Report 6. Number 6, 2 meetings be dedicated to Report 11, Programs to Assist Seniors. Number 7, 2 meetings be dedicated to Report 9, Digital Validation of Identity to Access Services. Number 8, the chair schedule at least 2 meetings for the consideration of draft reports for all of the above. And number 9, notwithstanding a meeting called pursuant to Standing Order 106.4, no meetings of the committee or subcommittee be held during Parliament's adjournment from December 18th, 2024 to January 26th, 2024.
Thank you. Have you sent the motion?
It is on its way right now.
Perfect.
The clerk will receive it very shortly.
All right, then. I will suspend in a second. I'm just, again, for the witnesses, if you can just hang tight. Again, you're welcome to stretch your legs, and I will come. Well, you'll hear the meeting. You'll hear the meeting gavelled back, but I will probably be about, again, 10, 15 minutes before coming back to you if the debate goes on. So again, I will suspend this meeting until the motion is distributed to members. I'll bring the meeting back into order. Ms. Khalid, would you like to speak to your... No, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Just 1 second. Yes. Yeah, so, well, just 1 second. So, oh, good. All the witnesses are back as well. So, Ms. Khalid, unfortunately, I am ruling the motion out of order, not because there's anything wrong with it as a motion itself, but it is not related to the study at hand. It is tangentially, you have one line, but this it encompasses all kinds of community businesses which aren't related to today's meeting. Is that a point of order, Ms. Khalid? Yes, please.
Well, it's not really a point of order, but I will say, Chair, that this is absolutely what 100% related to what this committee is. The Auditor General is here with 8 reports. We're not limited to what one report says or not, and a lot of what I have put forward in this motion is to help us and guide us in getting through a lot of these reports. So with that, Chair, I challenge your ruling.
All right. The chair is challenged. Please take the roll call, clerk.
Shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Ms. Bradford? No. Monsieur Drouin?
Against.
Mr. Erskine-Smith?
Against.
Ms. Khalid?
Against.
Ms. Yip? No. Mr. McCauley?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Mr. Morant?
Sustain the chair.
Madame Sinclair de Gagny?
Oui.
Mr. Cannings?
No.
6 yeas, 4 nays.
Very good. The motion stands. I'm going to come back to the witnesses shortly. We'll see where we end up here. Ms. Khalid, would you like the floor again? Yes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I realize now as I read the text of the motion that I have made a little bit of an error in point 4, where we've already heard from Mr. Andrew Noseworthy, and I would like to, if it's seek unanimous consent from the committee to replace Mr. Noseworthy with Doug McConaughey.
Is there unanimous consent to swap out Mr. Noseworthy, remove him from the motion, and replace him with Mr. McConaughey?
No, I'd like to hear from him again, actually. So I support your original.
All right. So does anyone disagree with that?
But do you want to hear from Noseworthy?
No. All right. Very good.
Sure. No, I said I'm not granting you C because I want to hear from Noseworthy.
We did already.
The committee has heard from Noseworthy.
Like
all right. Okay. Very good. UC is denied. Ms. Khalid, you still have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair.
You can bring it up.
I'm sure that my colleagues are welcome to move that motion should they so please. I would also like to make an amendment based on conversations with my colleagues.
You cannot amend your own motion.
Oh, I can't amend my own motion? Jean, put up your hand.
Thank you. But you're on the list. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. And as I had said earlier, I think that it is important for us to have a very clear understanding how we are going to move forward with the very, very important reports of the Auditor General, but then also to discuss what is pending within the Public Accounts Committee, which is what point number 8 in my motion also deals with. So I'm hoping for the support of all of my colleagues on this, and look forward to getting some really important work done and helping to support the Auditor General and our Parliament in what has been produced before us and what we hear from stakeholders and from experts on these very important issues. Thanks, Chair.
Very good. Mr. Nader, you have the floor, please.
Thank you.
Après ça, c'est Madame de Gagné, and then
After that, Madame de Gagné.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will make an amendment towards the end of my comments, but I just want to start off with a few observations. First and foremost, point 9. notwithstanding a meeting called pursuant to Standing Order 1064, no meetings of the committee or subcommittee be held during Parliament's adjournment from December 18th, 2024 to January 26, 2025. I know there are a lot of Canadians out there who, take 1 or 2 days off for Christmas and the holiday season. Some maybe take a full week off, but it looks like the Liberal Party wants to take a full 6 weeks off for
Point of order,
the holiday
Mr.
season
Chair.
this year.
Ms. Khalid, what is the point of order?
It is. We're not taking that time off.
That is not a point
I'm
of order.
working in my constituency office during the entire time. And it is absolutely unfair for the Conservatives to suggest that I am going to be going away on
Ms.
holiday.
Khalid. You are welcome to make these points. I can see this going. I'm going to excuse the witnesses. You are excused. Thank you very much. We might see you again very soon. Mr. Nader, back to you, please.
Well, then allow me to rephrase it. Obviously, the Liberals want to take a holiday from accountability.
I just want to make sure. This includes our friends who have joined us virtually from EDC. You are all excused. I understand you're probably in time zones far, far away. So I don't know if it's good night or good morning, but have a good day. Thank you. And we appreciate you coming.
Thanks,
Mr. Nader.
Thank you, Chair. And just to rephrase my comment, I didn't want to imply that parliamentarians aren't working in their ridings, but obviously the Liberals want to take a holiday from accountability for the next 6 weeks and avoid discussing
take exception to that again, Chair. Let's just not.
Okay,
let's debate the motion.
Ms. Khalid, Ms. Khalid, these are not points of order, and I appreciate the banter back and forth. I'm happy to put you down on the list again, but I'd ask, of course I can, but I would ask you not to interrupt speakers. Mr. Nader.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, ducking from accountability seems to be the rule of the day with this motion, and maybe it's a little bit too close to home for these Liberals after this meeting. But I digress. So first of all, I mean, saying that we shouldn't have any meetings during this time period, that really handcuffs our committee and prevents us from doing our job and preventing us from looking at, for example, CEBA, as the first point of the motion until after January 27th, 2025, while also ending and killing a number of other motions. Despite the fact that we actually had a subcommittee meeting to discuss this, here we are with this Liberal guillotine motion, as it's called. It's interesting that when there are hard-hitting studies, the Liberals are eager to dispose of them, and yet they come here and try to say all the great things they're doing out of the darkness of this report. But let's talk about this motion at hand and why it is important that we look at the CEBA motion and not kill it until 7 or 8 weeks from now. What we heard today in the limited testimony from our virtual participants from EDC is quite frankly unacceptable. It fails to address the seriousness of this report. It fails to actually provide forthright and clear answers to what I would say are very simple questions. The fact that Mr. McCauley had to ask multiple times for a yes or no question is quite frankly unacceptable. The fact that they accepted the responsibility for a program knowing full well that they didn't have the capacity to do it. The fact that hundreds of millions of dollars were spent, despite the fact to Accenture, despite the fact that Accenture didn't actually deliver the loans. It was the financial institutions that were delivering the loans. You have breakdown in documentation. I mean, Mr. McCauley and I quipped a little bit about GC Strategies being involved, but that's what happened here. And interesting, if you read from testimony from April of 2020. The minister at the time, Minister Mary Ng, stated this: in fact, the decision maker on the loan will be that financial institution, the bank or the credit union, to the customers. I would encourage businesses to go to their financial institution to see if they are going to get that support. But yet we have this example where EDC, which was not a loan provider, I think they said in total somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 loans internationally, then expected to do hundreds of thousands of loans. It was doomed to be a challenge from the start. And what we've seen now with the Auditor General report is that unfortunately that has come to fruition. And the fact that Accenture was delivered on a sole source contract, something that our colleague Madame Sinclair de Gagné has highlighted several months ago, is frankly unacceptable. It does not comply with the rules, and I hear some people trying to justify it, that we were in a pandemic, that things had to happen fast, and the Auditor General dispelled that. She said again very clearly today that perhaps there could have been a case made for the initial contract, but there were off ramps all the way around where quick procurements, requests for proposals could have been undertaken that would not have been sole sourced contracts. That's the real challenge. We had questions. Mr. Morantz, I know. Help me with one of my questions, because he was quite interested in the forgivable portion of those loans, whether some of these loans that were supposed to be the forgivable portion, some cases it was 10,000, some cases it was 20,000, depending on which intake it was. Well, where's that money now? That money, if it wasn't eligible for the loan itself, surely the repayment, the non-repayable portion would be ineligible as well. And yet here we are, not getting those answers. And then the big concern that I had today was the cases, and I believe it was 17 cases that were found to have been potentially fraudulent and were referred to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Those totaled in the amount of $1 million. That's $1 million that went to potentially fraudulent activities. That's significant. And I know there's Canadians out there right now who are really, really suffering, really trying to pinch their pennies together to make sure that they have something on the dinner table at Christmas this year, something underneath the tree for their young kids. We see food bank use, sky high, and yet we have an example here of $1 million of financing just going out to potentially fraudulent activities. And that's just the fraudulent side of things. Those who are ineligible, over $3.5 billion. And, no normal Canadian, no average Canadian will ever see $3.5 billion in their bank account. And yet that's the amount that has been taken out the door by ineligible payments. I think it's highly unacceptable. And frankly, when you have this situation where Finance Canada, the Minister of Finance, we're assuming, everything is accountable to the Minister of Finance within the department through the Deputy Minister, who is currently Mr. Forbes, and is the person under the Financial Administration Act who is responsible, just to respond to the earlier comment from the previous motion, which has now been adjourned, but it is the current accounting officer, the Deputy Minister, who is subject to accountability to this very committee. But the fact that they were told and indicated to deliver this program, despite the fact that they did not have the capability or capacity to do so, was frankly unacceptable. If you look on the Export Development Canada website, they refer to themselves as, quote, "As international risk experts, we help Canadian companies to navigate, manage, and take on risk to support their growth beyond Canada's borders." Their work is not loans. They are not a lending agency to domestic Canadian businesses. And to go from where they were talking about potentially 300 loans to potentially, I believe it was 900,000, it simply boggles the mind that this was something that Finance Canada allowed or forced upon them, and then second, that EDC actually accepted it. They actually had to have a change in their mandate to even allow them to do this work to begin with. So the fact that this was actually setting off alarm bells on day one, it was just frankly astonishing. And EDC as a corporation have really failed the litmus test of basic accountability standards. The Auditor General made it very clear, and I'm going to quote a very, very brief sentence. She wrote on page 18, quote, "Basic cost controls were missing in EDC's management of CEBA contracts." They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't have even the most basic cost controls on these contracts, but they allowed it just to go without being accountable. It's truly astonishing. And again, hundreds of millions to Accenture, who then awarded another contract to their own subsidiary. I mean, it just gets worse and worse. And you would have thought that the ArriveCan study was bad, but this one is this one's even worse. And again, we have a government who tries to explain it away. And I heard one Liberal MP say, "Well, it's not so bad because 91% of businesses were eligible." Yeah, but 9%, representing 3.5 billion, were not. I mean, that's the thing. These Liberals don't understand that this is a boatload of money that is hard to come by in the economic climate that we are in. And you know, I found one thing. I found a lot of things disappointing with the witness testimonies coming to us by Zoom, despite the fact that their head office is 450 meters from this very building. But I digress on that point. But I really was disappointed that they failed to take accountability. There were no admissions that they had failed. There were no admissions that they made mistakes, that they failed in their basic fundamental principles to protect taxpayers' dollars. They really didn't do that. And it's not. I shouldn't just focus on EDC because they're not the only ones who failed. I mean, finance is equally, if not more, culpable in this case. I mean, the Auditor General pointed out pretty clearly that it was, and I'm going to quote from 8.42 of the report. She wrote that there were very different interpretations amongst departments regarding their roles and responsibilities and accountabilities. And she went on to say, no department took the lead to implement basic program elements. It seems like each of the departments experienced this program differently. No one was accountable. No one was taking the lead. No one was taking the accountability for how this program unfolded. You know, when we look at where this could have been and better managed, we really got to question why this was even allowed. I mean, this was simply unacceptable. Now, Chair, I did foreshadow that I would make a small amendment to this, and so I would move that the first point where it says any further meetings on Report 8 Canada Emergency Business Account take place after January 27th, 2025. I would just replace January 27th, 2025 with December 5th, 2024. I think that's a common sense amendment, and hopefully that would be acceptable.
Sorry, just one second. Hold on. I thought you were going to be longer than that. Just 1 second. I'm going to pull up the motion. I just want to make sure I understand it here. So this is in point one. Oh, I see. After December.
Instead of January 27th, 2025, December 5th, 2024.
Okay. All right. So we have an amendment on the floor to point one. Instead of any further meetings on Report 8, Canada Emergency Business Account take place after January 27th, 2025. The amendment is to replace the date to December 5, 2024. You could speak to that if you like, and I have Madame Secla Desgagnés who wishes to speak to the amendment. Encore une fois, Madame.
Once again, Madame Sinclair Desgagnés, it's quite simply just to change the date from January 27 to December 5, 2024.
Everyone's, I'm starting a new list for the amendment. I have the original list for, okay, very good. Vous avez la parole.
You have the floor. Well, My points, I hope, will be quite clear and quite succinct. I think that several points on the amendment follow on what was decided in the subcommittee, which was to finish ArriveCan, finish what the business was, and then proceed with the other issues. In view of the fact that the date is the first point here, with respect to CEBA, we have to deal with what was on our platter beforehand. There are, of course, hundreds of millions of dollars that have been involved in the handouts to Accenture, so the CEBA piece is very important. But nonetheless, I think that the work of parliamentarians is to do their work as quickly as possible. But we also have families. We have constituents who need to be in touch with us during the holidays. So if there were emergency meetings, that would be one thing. So I would be opposed to Mr. Nader's amendment. But that being said, parliamentarians have to show some judgment. So at point 9, that is saying not being able to have any meetings, whether they be urgent or not, emergency ones or not, I do not agree with. I do not agree with point number 9. So if there are no meetings on the first point before the 27th of January, and once again, if there are urgent meetings that come up maybe between Christmas and the 26th of January, I think it is our duty to come back here as a committee to deal with the matter at hand. So I don't know if it's possible, but can I move a sub-amendment? We're listening to you. I don't know if it's possible. I don't either. I would like to put back January 27 for the first point number 1. No, you're opposed to the amendment. But could my sub-amendment then affect the other amendments? We agree? No? Well, we are speaking about the amendment now. Yes, but can't I make an amendment? No, we're speaking to the amendment now. But once we have finished with the amendment before us, you will have the floor again. So I'd just like to mention once again that I would like to withdraw points 7 and 9 from the motion. No, we're just speaking to the amendment. I'm not making another amendment, but I just want to do that. No. As is usual, we are debating the amendment. And that is the date, the change of date that was proposed. But, Chair, certainly you have some latitude with respect to some colleagues. So I would also ask to benefit from that latitude. Well, I would prefer that you don't propose any changes to the motion. I just express a wish, but it's the same thing. So it's a wish, so therefore it is theoretical. Once again, I think that what we have to do is look at what was done in the subcommittee. And if that doesn't mean studying the report number 9 of, I think that, once again, that point number 9 is something that I am not happy with because it does not allow for any emergency meetings. You give me the opportunity to express my wishes, and I thank you for that. Well, thank you.
On the amendment to the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I think what has been discussed around the table is quite evident where members stand, and I just wanted to clarify one point that Madame Sinclair Degagné had made with respect to point number 9.
Let me just, this is what I was trying to avoid. By introducing point 9, she's kind of brought these in. These were wish lists. She will have an opportunity to table that. So I'm not going to cut you off, Ms. Khalid, but I'm not going to let Madame Sinclair Degagné, so you will have to talk it through. But that is what exactly I was trying to avoid. We're on the amendment to the motion.
Yep.
As I said, Madame Sinclair Degagné will have the floor immediately after we deal with this amendment, and she'll be able to propose her motions there. You have the floor.
Thank you for that, Chair. And this does speak to the motion. I think the concerns raised with respect to the dates of the motion, of the amendment as presented, was that we are not able to have any meetings. So what point 9 says is that unless it's a 106.4, no meetings can be called. So yes, emergency meetings can absolutely be called, and I would want them to be called in a matter of emergency or of urgency. The matters outlined in this motion are important. They should obviously be studied and discussed, and what I'm proposing is something that all parliamentarians can come together with the plan. And so I don't agree with Mr. Nader's amendments with respect to the dates, because I feel that I need to spend a lot of time with my constituency. I want to actually see my constituents on a regular basis, and I barely get to see them just on the weekends. So, I think that as this work is important, it is not urgent for us to take that time away from our constituents in order to come back for this. I think that we have ample time in the new year once the House resumes on the 27th, I believe, is the first a date that the House sits again, and that we can resume our parliamentary duties when it is scheduled by the House of Commons. I don't think that we need to make an urgency at the detriment of our individual and collective constituents on this. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khalid. Mr. McCauley, on the amendment to the motion, which is on the date, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I agree with the amendment, obviously. I think there are times when we do have to be here. It's funny, we went through this exact same thing. Excuse me a sec. We went through this exact same thing, and I'm not disparaging my colleagues here at this committee, but we went through this exact same thing at another committee where we heard stories such as, we're working from our constituency, which is fine. I do the same. But break weeks are sacrosanct. We're with our constituents. We cannot even virtually attend meetings because it's so important with our constituents, which I agree that time with our constituents is very important. But we actually looked up the calendars through Facebook and Twitter posts of these members, and it turned out over a 6-week break period where we're actually meeting, or we weren't meeting, they had a total of the 5 members, 17 events they attended. I think, frankly, if we cannot take 2 hours or an hour of our time, regardless of whether it's a break week or sitting week, to discuss important matters.
Just 1 second, Mr. Colley. I have a point of order from Mr. Durain.
I didn't hear correctly. Did Mr. McCauley perform an audit based on Twitter and Facebook posts?
That's not a Mr. Durain.
I just want to make sure I heard properly.
Well, you should call IT and have them check your headset then. Mr. McCauley, you have the floor.
I'm not sure what that was, but thank you for your intervention, Mr. Drouin. But the reality is sometimes things are important that we do have to plow through, and I, as a chair in another committee, have to fly out to be in person because those are our rules, and you would have to be here as well, Chair. And that is part of the job of being a chair, and that's the sacrifice you have to make. The rest of us, including me on this committee, I can sit there in my home and Zoom in for 2 hours I do not think that is such a sacrifice, especially when we're looking at $3 billion of money, taxpayers' money given out to ineligible applicants. Sorry, I hear a big sigh from the Liberal side. I apologize if they're worried about taxpayers' money being wasted. We saw the same thing in this committee a couple of years ago with the Auditor General pointing out $27 billion of money stolen from taxpayers through ineligible applicants. And we heard from the CRA that they were not interested in tracking down this money. We actually heard the CRA, despite not putting forward any information of their own, stating that the Auditor General was incorrect. We have in my riding of Edmonton West, I often speak about it, it's called the Veterans Association Food Bank. And it's a food bank that provides food and help, pet food, diapers, and a lot of goods for our veterans, but also RCMP members that are on pension or first responders. Now, in the city of Edmonton, which is one of the highest incomes in a country as wealthy as Canada, we have veterans relying on food banks. They went to the government to ask for, I think it was $11 million for a refrigeration system, and they got back zero. And yet somehow we've got $3 billion to happily give away to people who are ineligible. So if I'm asked to spend 2 hours on a break week to determine how we can stop $3 billion going to ineligible people and redirect it to the Veterans Association Food Bank or another food bank or other charitable causes, then yes, I will find the 2 hours to do so. If I'm a chair of a committee, like you are, I would expect for something important, you will get on the plane yourself, Mr. Chair, and get out here for the 2 hours and find the time. Members of Parliament are given incredible leeway to set their own schedules. Being able to set 2 hours aside for something so important, regardless of whether it's a break week or a sitting week, it's still a working week. And I'm sure that every one of us, all 338 in the House, could find those 2 hours for something so important. My other concern about this motion as written, and I'm glad my colleague addressed it, it does allow for a 1604, and perhaps I was conferring with my colleague, Mr. Nader, who's probably the most learned in the House on Boston Gagnon, the Green Book, as I often just call it, the Big Green Book. A 1064 doesn't call a set of meetings such as we're having today on this mega billion-dollar scandal. It calls a meeting to decide if there will be a meeting. So if we have a 1064 and we gather on a break week, I'm sure the Liberals will find time for that, and we pass a motion or bring through a motion to actually have meetings, is that then stopped by this motion? The way I read it, 1064 doesn't call a set of meetings or a study, because we went through this with Phoenix, which, by the way, the Liberals actually fought against way back in 2016, but it doesn't 1064 doesn't set up meetings to look into things. It sets up a meeting to allow for a motion for an investigation. The way I read this motion, as put forward, not the amendment, but the motion itself, is a 1064, we could have something urgent. And again, I asked my colleague, Mr. Nader, to correct me, and perhaps the clerk, but the way I look at a 1064, we come in, we have the meeting, we could put through a motion to actually study it, and the Liberals, with their NDP colleague, could actually vote that down. So having an option to do 1064 over a break week is basically, perhaps I understand the intent. I won't attribute it to malice, but it does not allow emergency meetings. It allows an emergency meeting to perhaps call a meeting, which would then be voted down by the Liberals and our NDP colleague. So I will support Mr. Nader's amendment as much as I dislike being here on break week as well. I will get on the plane, or I will get on Zoom, if necessary, to look at these important issues, whether it is $3 billion, whether it's Finance Canada saying we're not responsible, EDC is, whether it's EDC saying, well, we'll oversee it with Finance Canada, which we heard today, despite the fact Finance put in their response to the AG report saying they weren't responsible, but the board's responsible. But EDC said they would work with Finance to recover the money, where Finance says, I don't think EDC even read the report or the responses, because Finance says they're not responsible as part of the clawing back any money. EDC board is. EDC is saying, well, we'll work together with Finance Canada. You know, I think we need to get at this as soon as possible to see how we're going to get that money back. Are we leaving to Accenture to claw the money back? And I've got this, I just find it's the ultimate irony. If you look at the EDC website, it actually states that EDC offers insurance to protect your business against the risk of unpaid invoices. So here's EDC offering insurance. They're in the business of protecting businesses against the risk of unpaid invoices, and they themselves cannot look after unpaid invoices. They have to send it out to Accenture. I'd like to find out why the CRA is not going after this. They go after for student loans. They've got all the documentation. I assume they have social insurance numbers. They can claw back the money from tax returns like we do with overpayments for EI, even when the government makes a mistake. And I found this out when I was spent a couple of years as the EI appeals chair, that even if the government makes a mistake and tells someone, yes, go ahead and fill out the EI form that way, it's up to the constituent, the citizen, to ensure that they're filling it out correct. Even if the EI, employment insurance, gives them the wrong information, they're still accountable. 1,800-page rules, and they're still accountable. But if they make that mistake and EI claws it back, they will go after them by reducing child benefit, we'll take it back from tax returns. We haven't heard what they're doing. So they'll do this against an ordinary Canadian who makes a mistake. But here we have fraud. Only 17. I'd like to find out how much more, because it doesn't sound like they did a thorough. But here we have $3 billion in ineligible payments. And there's no talk of sending CRA after them. There's no talk about we're going to withhold tax returns. We're going to send it to collection agencies. It sounds like they're waiting for contract to expire with Accenture. I think this requires immediate looking after, not waiting. I think it's in the proposal here, the original amendment, a month and a half to look at this. This requires immediate attention. We saw with the EDC president, the people showed up today. They couldn't seem to give less of a concern about this. They even have a senior vice president. It's right on their webpage. The senior vice president of legal and SEBA is right in there, right in his job title. And yet EDC couldn't even be bothered. He couldn't be bothered to show up today. And I was polite to them. I'm frankly disgusted that they could not, high-level executives cannot get off their butts to walk down 2 blocks or 3 blocks to be here in person to talk to us about this scandal. Like, this is outrageous. Billions wasted, and they can't even bother to show up. So I think we need to look. They couldn't even be bothered to send the person responsible for SEBA that's listed proudly on their website. And I apologize, I'm like a teenager, my voice is cracking again, but I'm dumbfounded. We sit here again and again and again in this committee for years now, and we hear from the bureaucrats, we'll get around to it later. And then you'll have a Liberal, a year and a half is too quick a time to get a response back. Like, good Lord, anywhere at a 7-Eleven, you're a minimum wage worker at a 7-Eleven, and you have more accountability for their actions that executives are making $200,000-300,000. They got bonus. EDC got
Point of order,
bonuses.
Mr. Chair. I'm
Yes.
just questioning the relevance as to where Mr. McCauley is headed. It has nothing to do with the amendment right now.
Oh, I'm happy to address that.
Let me interject. We are out of resources. We will be back here Monday, not at this point.